Hi, welcome back. This is part two of our Introduction to the En-ROADS Climate Workshop. This section, we're going to focus on system dynamics. Last section, if you haven't watched it, please go back and watch it now. It introduces you to the simulation, and it also introduces you to the basics of climate science. In this one, we're focusing on system dynamics. System dynamics is a way to understand the way that a complex nonlinear system behaves over time. Of course, climate is definitely a non-linear system. There's a lot of different aspects to it, a lot of different stocks and flows. Maybe you've heard those terminologies before. That means things that are moving through the system and things that accumulate within the system happening at different times. There are delays happening, and delays produce certain effects, secondary effects all on their own. Sometimes we have certain feedback loops. Maybe that's another term that you've heard before. um, where there's a dynamic that's reinforcing and reinforcing and producing exponential growth. Or maybe there's a balancing loop, for example, something like the carbon cycle, which you might have learned about a long time ago in your science class in grade school, where there's um, a negative cycle like that. So there's three really important dynamics for you to understand when we look at this model. That's because we are going to be looking at temperature rise if we do absolutely nothing, going up to 3.6 degrees Celsius or around 7 degrees Fahrenheit. And what we actually want to do is get that temperature rise no higher than 2 degrees Celsius, preferably no higher than 1.5 degrees Celsius, because that is what we agreed to in the Paris Agreements all those years ago. So in order to get there, first we have to think about bathtub dynamics. This is the quintessential image that you get when you talk about system dynamics. In bathtub dynamics, we have a bathtub representing, in this case, the atmosphere. We have our tap of water going into our bathtub. That's emissions. And then we have our drain. That's removals of emissions out of the atmosphere. So something that's very important to note is that emissions are not flowing in at the exact same rate that net removals are flowing out. If that were true, the levels of emissions in our atmosphere would be staying completely at the same level. Of course, what's happening is that emissions are coming in much faster. The tap is much stronger than the drain. And so those conditions are causing the water level to rise. Always remember that in a complex system, when your flows are going in, your inflows faster than your flows going out, the level rises. When the outflows are going faster than the inflows, the level is going to fall. So as we go through this scenario, I really want you to think about which of these interventions, which of these levers that we're pulling are representing inflows, emissions going in, and which of these interventions are representing outflows, removing from the atmosphere. And then I really want you to think about, where should we actually focus our energy? Should we focus on the tap and getting our emissions to be less flowing in? Or should we focus more on the drain and removing emissions from the atmosphere? So that's a really interesting question that I want you to consider before we come into our simulation. And it's, I think, going to produce really interesting conversations. The next dynamic that I want to talk about is something called capital stock turnover. So the first question I like to ask is, why doesn't everyone who can afford it buy an electric vehicle tomorrow? And I'm not just talking about someone who thinks electric vehicles might be interesting, but is not really sold. I'm talking about people like, for example, my husband and myself. We are completely sold on electric vehicles. We love electric vehicles. We would totally buy one, but we're not going to buy one tomorrow. We don't have one. We're not going to buy one. So why is that? I'm going to pose another question. Why is it taking so long to clean up our grid? And of course, I'm talking about our electrical grid, which is being powered currently mostly by coal, but other fossil fuels. And we keep talking about renewable energy. We have all these nice forms of it, like solar and wind. Why is it taking so long to get it put in place? And of course, the answer is that we already have useful infrastructure that's not going to be replaced for the whole duration of its useful life. My husband and I have a car, a gas-powered conventional car. We are going to use it until that car can drive no more. Same thing with our grid. We have infrastructure maybe that was built not very long ago, and we have to wait until it's not able to be used anymore. That's just the reality of the situation. Infrastructure takes a really long time to plan, to build, and to complete. So as we look at climate interventions, remember, we need things that work now. We need things that work very quickly. If we have to build a lot of infrastructure, that thing is not going to be very effective as something that needs less infrastructure. The more infrastructure we need to build, the more time it's going to take for this technology to work, and the worse off we're going to be in terms of climate. The same goes for what happened in the past. If recently somebody built a power plant, we're going to have to wait for that to come offline. So it's also a really powerful tool to stop building dirty infrastructure powered by coal. If we can stop that from happening and put in infrastructure powered by renewables, that's going to be very high leverage. Finally, I want to talk about a dynamic called multi-solving. This is the idea that every time we do a climate intervention, we're not just doing it for the climate. Every positive climate intervention has another positive effect in our society, or in this case, for our business. So maybe it'll be impactful for creating jobs. Maybe it'll be helpful for human health. In this case, we really personalized it since you're business leaders, and we really want you thinking when you are working in your business is going to be making decisions about things that it can do for the climate. And you're going to have to make the case to do these things, and business are going to be very reluctant to do them. You're going to say, they're going to businesses are big bureaucracies, they're very inertia driven. And when you have to make a business case to do these things, here are some of the things that you can think about why you would possibly do this expensive, challenging climate intervention. First of all, think going concern. It's possible that your investors are even going to lose interest in you in a business and are not going to keep investing in you because they think you're not going to make it long term. That's why we have to do this intervention. Another thing might be protecting natural resources. Maybe the inputs into the things that we're manufacturing are going to be no more. And we want to keep manufacturing our products in a sustainable way, of course, so that our users can buy them. And so we have to protect this natural resource. Cut costs, that's a big one, probably the one that's most desirable to decision makers at your business. If we put in this renewable energy, look at our NPV, it's going to cut costs over time. Basic. Here's a big one, employee health, safety, and well-being. If your employees are not healthy, safe, and well off, especially in a world where there are better alternatives, then your business is definitely going to suffer for it. You want your employees staying there and staying there long term and being happy and working for you. Obviously, not just because of your competitive advantage or whatever, but it's just good to keep your employees happy. It's a good thing to do. So that's important to think about. Maybe it's something you want to do to connect with stakeholders. Maybe your shareholders are demanding that you take climate action. Maybe your customers are demanding that you have environmentally sustainable products. There's a lot of different ways to connect with stakeholders. So that's a really important lever here. And finally, a huge one. How are we going to minimize risks in our business? If we want to go into this new market, but it's in a place that's very vulnerable to climate change, we want to show that we are going to directly help mitigate climate change in this market. So those are all of the multi-solving things I want us to think about every time, seriously, every time we do any intervention in the climate scenario, we're going to talk about how this helps our business, how this helps our society, how doing this is going to make our society a better place to live. And that's it. That's the whole summary of our dynamics. We have our bathtub dynamics, we have our capital stock turnover, and we have multi-solving. So I want you to really think about those hard. We're going to be talking about them a lot. They're going to help us have a really great simulation and lead to hopefully a lot of great conversations.